Sup, freaks? It's your boy Marty Bent here to introduce this episode of Tales from the Crypt. Matt and I had the immense pleasure of sitting down with Chris Belcher, the man behind JoinMarket, and the recent design implementation of CoinSwap, which he is currently working on. And he is being supported by the Human Rights Foundation. News just dropped a few minutes ago before recording this ad. This news dropped after we recorded this episode, so we did not cover that in the episode, but we did talk about dev funding towards the end, and it is very encouraging to see that the Human Rights Foundation has stepped up and provided Chris with a grant to work on this CoinSwap implementation specifically. So kudos to HRF for putting the team on their back here. This episode of Tales from the Crypt is brought to you by our good friends at the Cash App. They're helping you do many things. They're helping you stack sats, send sats, receive sats, sell sats, if you so please. On top of that, they're doing incredible things on the banking front. You can now use Cash App as your bank account. It has an account number and a routing number. You can start getting your paychecks direct deposited into the Cash App, and it's becoming a neobank where you can send your paychecks there, have them directly deposited, start stacking sats. Then also, if you want to, if you're a stonk picker out there, seems to be a lot of stonk pickers out there these days. Stock market going crazy, going mad, and it's if you want to do that, Cash App Investing is letting you stack slivers of stonks. Okay, you don't have to buy a whole stonk. If your favorite stonk has become out of your reach to purchase a whole of that stonk because of this crazy Fed-induced stock market bonanza, you can buy as little as $1 via Cash App Investing. And because Cash App's directly connected to your bank account, or like I described earlier, it is your bank account, there's no 4 to 5 day waiting periods. You can start investing today. As always, or before we get to the as always, Cash App Investing is a subsidiary of Square, member SIPC. Now, as always, when you download the app, if you haven't done it yet, if you're listening to this podcast, you're in America, you haven't done it yet, what the hell are you waiting for? Use the code STACKINGSATS. It's STACKINGSATS. You're going to get $10 upon sign up, and then $10 is going to go to our great friends at Owls Lacrosse in Chicago, doing incredible things in the west side and south side of Chicago, building a lacrosse program to help instill leadership values and teamwork into the children of Chicago. Owls Lacrosse, not Owls Lacrosse, not that dirtbag owl. Owls. My owl that sits outside my window, he made a Twitter account last night, and so he's going to be scoring these owl calls from here on out. So we'll see how I do. Download the Cash App. Enjoy this episode with Chris Belcher, and congrats to Chris for the grant from the HRF. Huge news. It's going to make Bitcoin better. Take care.
You've had a dynamic where money's become freer than free.
If you talk about a Fed just gone nuts, all the central banks going nuts.
So it's all acting like safe haven.
I believe that in a world where central bankers are tripping over themselves to devalue their currency, Bitcoin wins. In the world of fiat currencies, Bitcoin is the victor.
I mean, that's part of the bull case for Bitcoin.
If you're not paying attention, you probably should be.
What is up, freaks? Welcome back to Tales from the Crypt. It's your boy Marty Bent here on a lovely Tuesday afternoon. Despite all the madness going on in the world, I'm very excited for this conversation. It's a privacy-heavy conversation we're about to have. This is a topic that we talk a lot about here on TFTC. We've got Matt Odell with me, the privacy nut. What's going on, Matt?
It's going to be good. I'm excited.
And we're joined by Chris Belcher, who recently released a design implementation for a CoinSwap, which is not a new idea, but the first implementation that's come to market, and we're going to talk a lot about that. Chris, thank you for joining us.
Hello there. Thanks for having me.
I really appreciate it. You taking some time to come talk about this. We've talked about CoinSwap on this podcast last week after you dropped the implementation, so I guess we should just dive right into it. You and I have been talking since before this recording and have a little bit of structure laid out for this conversation, which isn't typical here on TFTC, but we're speaking to what I would deem somebody who's very knowledgeable in this space, and we're going to learn a lot about CoinSwap. So before we get into CoinSwaps, Chris, sort of how did you get into Bitcoin, and why are you focused on privacy?
Well, I've always liked coding and programming and cryptography. I remember reading about PGP and the crypto wars from ages and ages ago. And it's actually kind of funny story. When I was quite young, I used to be involved in, there was an old video game. I think people still play it, called RuneScape. And there was a thing where you could have in-game items and trade them. Back then, people would trade for PayPal. And obviously that didn't work very well because of all the chargebacks, and you'd find out each other's real names and that kind of thing. And then when I came across Bitcoin, I thought, hey, it's obvious, it's really good for video games, right? That's what it's for. And then the more I got into it, the more I read of how useful it is for other reasons. And I've always been interested in history, so I thought, yeah, it would be useful in, the Weimar Republic in Germany, that kind of thing, hard money. I just went from there, and I looked at what are the problems around Bitcoin, and got interested in privacy and validation. Like the Electrum personal server is all about validation as well. So yeah, that's my story pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for all the work that you've done to help improve personal validation and privacy overall, which JoinMarket specifically, and now CoinSwap, at least your implementation of a CoinSwap, which you're still working on, correct?
Yeah, it's in the design stages right now.
And so I guess let's help the audience understand what a CoinSwap is. When did the idea come to market, and how, I guess, your design would work once it's finally implemented?
So CoinSwap is, I'll deal with those things one by one. A CoinSwap is a privacy protocol, so it's like CoinJoin but something else. The point of it is to improve privacy in Bitcoin and fungibility. And the way CoinSwaps actually, what they do is they break the transaction graph. So you can imagine now when we look on the blockchain and there's a transaction that spends money's going from address A to address B, CoinSwap can make it so that the coins, like the actual ownership, ends up on a totally different address. I know, address Z, address X, which is entirely unrelated. And that's obviously really useful if you're using CoinSwap, but it's also useful for other people. If there's some other user who's never even heard of CoinSwap, who just makes a normal transaction, they'll have their privacy improved as well, because anyone who wants to analyze the blockchain, some kind of adversary, they'll always have to consider that maybe they see this transaction, they think, well, maybe a CoinSwap happened. So it will add a huge amount of doubt, I hope, and will make their analysis much harder and thereby improve privacy and fungibility. So the way CoinSwap is kind of, what it works is we've got Alice and Bob, like two entities, and they swap coins with each other. So Alice's coins ends up with Bob, and Bob's coins ends up with Alice. It's actually quite an old idea. Like, it's from 2013. It was invented by Greg Maxwell. Around the same, it was about a month or two after CoinJoin. So what was the other thing you were saying? Sorry, I forgot the rest of your question.
So I how would your design work once implemented?
So CoinSwaps, it's an old idea, but it has loads of the original. Greg Maxwell's design had loads of unsolved problems. So my design is basically solving these problems one by one. Like the title is CoinSwap, but there's loads of other building blocks in there that are necessary to really make it work well. So for example, in the original CoinSwap scheme, you had Alice and Bob would swap just one coin. So Alice would give 10 Bitcoins to Bob, and Bob would give 10 Bitcoins to Alice. And that means if there's an adversary who knows Alice's 10 Bitcoins, this adversary can search the blockchain for somewhere else where there's 10 Bitcoins, and they'd find Bob's 10 Bitcoins, then it would be easy. Okay, so these 10 Bitcoins went here, and these Bitcoins went back. So the amount would be a privacy leak. So my solution to that in the design is to have multi-transaction coin swaps. And that would be where Alice gives 10 Bitcoins to Bob, and Bob gives multiple coins back to Alice. So he gives her like 2 Bitcoins, 3 Bitcoins, and 5 Bitcoins. And those three together add up to 10. And then if our adversary is searching the entire blockchain, he'll never find one coin which is worth 10 Bitcoins. So that attack will will be fixed. Another problem in the original design is there's only two of these parties. So even though someone observing the blockchain doesn't know where the coins went, Bob does. Like if you're Alice, you have to trust Bob that they're not going to spy on you. So in my design, that's solved by routing CoinSwaps. So Alice would do a CoinSwap with Bob, and then Bob will do a CoinSwap with someone else, Charlie, and Charlie will do a CoinSwap with Dennis, and then Dennis will do a CoinSwap back to Alice. And then Alice would have her coins made anonymous, and all three of those other parties, Bob, Charlie, and Dennis, they'd have to collude if they wanted to figure out where all the coins actually went. So rooted CoinSwap kind of spreads out the trust in that way. Then another thing in the design is having a liquidity market. So that's just like in JoinMarket, where Alice would pay for the CoinSwaps actually to happen. So for these, Bob and Charlie and so on, they'll just hang around. They'll run a server all day, and they'll say, you can CoinSwap with me in return for a small fee, like a few Satoshi or something. It's exactly the same way it works in JoinMarket. But instead of CoinJoins, you get CoinSwaps. And the effect there, it means that if you're Alice, if you have a wallet, you can do a CoinSwap whenever you want. You just press a button, and a CoinSwap for your amounts, it doesn't have to be 10 Bitcoins, it can be 0. Whatever, any amount you want, it just happens straight away. The liquidity is always there because Alice is paying for it. Another idea that's in the design is the way CoinSwaps work is they have 2 of 2 multisigs, and they would be a bit more obvious on the blockchain. Like there are some 2 of 2 multisigs on the blockchain, but most people use single sig. And there's a technology which didn't exist back in 2013 called multi-party Ecdsa computation. And that's a technique where you essentially create a single signature, like a single Ecdsa signature, but actually it's a multisig. So actually Alice and Bob hold one private key each, and it acts like a multisig, but when it's actually mined into a block on the blockchain, it looks just like a single sig. And that would massively improve the anonymity because there's, like, most people use single sigs. Mm-hmm. And then these CoinSwap would just have a big anonymity set. So yeah, those are the building blocks. What were they? The multi-transactions, the routing, liquidity market, and multi-party Ecdsa computation. And
PaySwap, right? I think that's what you
Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. So another thing is you can do a PaySwap, a CoinJoin into a CoinSwap, because so CoinSwaps break the transaction graph heuristics, and PayJoins break the common input ownership heuristic. So I don't know how. Maybe I'll explain that for your listeners. That a transaction graph is just that idea that if a coin goes from A to B, then it actually went from A to B. And yeah, CoinSwap would make the coin end up in Z. And the common input ownership heuristic is this idea that if there's a transaction on Bitcoin, it has multiple inputs, then you, like an adversary, anyone analyzing the blockchain usually assumes that all the inputs are owned by the same person. And this assumption is broken in CoinJoin, in PayJoin, or any other kind of CoinJoin. And those two assumptions are really important for analysis, and if we can break them, then we gain a lot of privacy.
So diving more into like the actual function of how the swap works. So you said Alice and Bob each have a private key that controls the multi-sig. How do they do the exchanging of the addresses that they're each sending their coins to? How does that work out?
So how CoinSwap actually technically work? It's not too far from Lightning. So if you understand Lightning, how payment channels work, then CoinSwap isn't too different. So you have Alice has coins, and she sends them to a 2 of 2 multisig, where Alice and Bob each hold one private key. But before she actually broadcasts the transaction, she gets a refund. She gets another transaction which spends from the multisig, and it gives the coins back to her. But those coins have a smart contract. They have conditions on them. And that smart contract is either the coins go back to Alice after some time, like 3 days, say, or the coins will go to Bob if Bob reveals a hash pre-image. If he reveals a value X such that hash of X is equal to this thing in the transaction. And then Bob has the same setup but mirrored. So Bob will send his coins to a 2 of 2 multisig, and he has a similar contract where after some time he'll get his money back, or Alice will get the money if she reveals a hash pre-image. So what's happened there? We're in a situation where Alice and Bob both get their money back if they wait for a timeout, or the other person gets the money, like the coins are swapped if they know the pre-image. So we're in that situation. Now let's say the pre-image is revealed. One of the, say Bob starts with it and he reveals it. That means both parties will get their money back straight away. They just reveal a pre-image and they get it. And they don't have to trust anyone else. So you could say the money is basically in their possession, like the smart contract is filled. What they do next, because they want to save time and they want to save minor fees, instead of actually making the transaction, they just give the private keys to each other. What happens then is Alice has her coins in a 2 of 2 multisig, where she has both the private keys, and Bob has his coins in a 2 of 2 multisig, where he has both the private keys. So in that way, we just have this situation where the coins are swapped, but there's no trust involved. That Alice can't steal Bob's coins and Bob can't steal Alice's coins. In the same way as CoinJoin. So that CoinJoin is also non-custodial. You can never lose your coins doing it if it's correctly implemented. So by analogy of Lightning, if you could understand this, that it's as if Alice opened the channel with Bob and then pushed all her money in the payment channel to Bob, and then they did a cooperative close to send the money to Bob. Exactly at the same time, Bob opened the channel with Alice, pushed all his money in the channel to Alice, and then they closed the channel. And they did this at the same time so that they can't steal from each other.
And so,
yeah, hopefully that's clear.
If this is, no, it's very clear. But one thing to sort of really just like hone in on why this is a different solution to coin joining and Lightning in general. Like, why would somebody create this setup instead of just like a Lightning channel?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a big reason why it's been so long since 2013 why people realized this is useful. So I think the biggest difference is CoinSwap is inherently on-chain. That if you want to pay someone with Lightning, they have to actually use Lightning. They have to give you a Lightning invoice. But if you want to pay someone with a CoinSwap transaction, you just pay to a regular Bitcoin address. So anyone who accepts Bitcoin today on a Bitcoin address will accept CoinSwap. So it means once this software is written, it can be adopted unilaterally. So an exchange or any merchant who accepts Bitcoin, they'll just take CoinSwaps with there's no way they can censor it. There's no way they could stop it in the way that they could, in theory, just say, okay, we're not going to accept Lightning because we think it's too private. That won't be possible with CoinSwap. Another difference is that CoinSwap and Lightning solve their liquidity issues in a different way. So in Lightning, these channels are open for forever, essentially, and they have there's all kind of issues of inbound liquidity and channel rebalancing, that you can only send an amount of money that there's a valid route all the way to the person you want to send to. And that generally means it's limited to small amounts. But with CoinSwap, it has this liquidity market that's like CoinJoin, where Alice pays CoinSwap fees straight away up front. It means she could do any amount because the liquidity is always there. Like the liquidity will be paid for straight away. So the example I've been using is in JoinMarket right now, anyone can create CoinJoins up to 200 Bitcoins. Like it's a ridiculously big value. And it costs a few thousand Satoshis or something. And we can expect the same thing will happen with CoinSwap, that people could do a CoinSwap for any Bitcoin amount if they wanted. So that's another difference, is that they deal with liquidity in a different way. And another difference is, I forgot to mention it in the design. There's this idea of Fidelity Bonds, and that's a way that solves a few different problems. But one of the problems it solves is Sybil attacks. So in JoinMarket or in CoinSwap or in any kind of privacy solution, you could have an attack when an adversary makes lots of fake bots, makes lots of fake other people who pretend they want to improve their privacy, but actually try and spy on everyone else. And if you're doing a CoinJoin or a CoinSwap and everyone else in your CoinJoin is actually one person, they can spy on you. And Fidelity Bonds are a way to avoid this, where you can do the mathematics of it, and it would actually cost like loads of money, like millions of dollars would have to be locked up for a Sybil attack to be successful. And CoinSwap would have, like, my design would use Fidelity Bonds to make these Sybil attacks very expensive. And Lightning doesn't need to do this. It doesn't, Lightning's purpose is to have these payments. Like, it's not aiming to solve Sybil attacks, but that's another difference between them.
Basically, like the Fidelity Bond idea makes it so you have this in JoinMarket. Let's talk about JoinMarket in case of Fidelity Bonds because it exists already. You have these makers that are posting these open offers to CoinJoin your funds with, and it becomes cheaper for you to have all of your funds in a single maker instance than to spread it out, right? The way the math works out.
Yeah, that's right. So these makers, they essentially have a message and announcement that says you can create a CoinJoin with me up to this amount of Bitcoins I have, and it will only cost you, I don't know, 0.1%, whatever, some number. I'm just making up that. And that means anyone can create a CoinJoin like for cheap. They just pay for the liquidity. But an attack there is that an adversary could make loads of these bots. They could make 10 bots or 20 bots, and they all say you can make a CoinJoin with me for really cheap. And if you're unlucky enough to choose one of those 10 bots to make your CoinJoins, and they make up everyone else in your CoinJoin except for you, then they can spy on you easily because they know the inputs and the outputs. And Fidelity Bonds, what they are is they're a way to provably sacrifice value. So what these makers would do is they'd send their Bitcoins to a time-locked address. Bitcoins would be there, I don't know, say locked up for 1 year. And the value of the Fidelity Bond goes as squared, so V squared. So like if the maker sacrifices 10 Bitcoins, their value will be 10 times 10, which is 100. But if they sacrificed 20 Bitcoins, it will be 20 times 20, which is 400, right? So they have an incentive to lump all their coins that they want to sacrifice into one bot. And it means if someone wants to attack the system, if they want to create 10 bots, then it will cost them much more because this effect of squaring, to make 10 bots, all of those things will be reduced by a square factor. Like for example, if they had 10 Bitcoins they want to sacrifice, if they put it all into one bot, their value would be 10 times 10, which is 100. But if they split up those 10 Bitcoins into 10 bots, which had 1 Bitcoin each, the value would be 1 squared plus 1 squared plus 1 squared, all the way to 10. So the total value will be 10 instead of 100, which means someone who's behaving honestly, who just wants to earn money without spying on anyone else, are going to have a huge advantage because their Fidelity Bond value is 100 Bitcoins, and this Sybil attacker's Fidelity Bond value is only 10. That's the way the maths works to make Fidelity Bonds really expensive to do.
No, and it's beautiful too because the way it disincentivizes Sybil attacks, it also incentivizes long-term holders to engage in Fidelity Bonds because because they're not going to spend their coins anyway. If they were just sitting in a hardware wallet doing nothing, you may as well put them in this. So there's lots of coins out there, I assume, to do this. Better privacy arguably makes Bitcoin as a network overall more valuable too. So locking in
and you get money for doing it. Like you don't have to risk if you're like a hodler, you don't have to risk your Bitcoins. You always have the private keys, but you'd make a small amount of CoinJoin fees or CoinSwap fees just coming in, for running this server. It's a bit like in routing. In Lightning routing, you get paid to route other people's transactions, that kind of thing. You get money for not risking your Bitcoins, which is nice. Another thing that I should mention that Fidelity Bonds solve is the old CoinSwap design from 2013 had a DOS problem, an issue where Alice and Bob, what can happen is, so Alice would send her coins into the multisig, and Bob could just disappear. If he was trying to troll, if he was trying to attack the system, he could disappear. And Alice would get her money back, but she'd have to waste miner fees and she'd have to waste time. And if Bob could keep doing this, like he could, I disappeared once, and then this time I really, really will do a CoinSwap. Oh, I've disappeared again. If he does that indefinitely, it would just make the system stop working. And Fidelity Bonds are also a solution for this because suppose Bob is this attacker, he'll need a Fidelity Bond for Alice to CoinSwap with him. But if he does disappear, then Alice will just refuse to CoinSwap with him again with that Fidelity Bond. And it would mean someone attacking the system in this way would also have to spend lots of money. So there's that problem of who goes first, who actually puts their money into a multisig first. They'd be vulnerable to this attack, and the Fidelity Bonds can solve that.
So would that be more like a DDoS attack?
Exactly. A DOS attack, denial of service. And if you notice in Lightning, they solve it in a different way. That what happens generally in Lightning is people with wallets, they open a channel to someone, like you might have a wallet on your phone, you open a channel to some merchant. The merchant isn't putting up any money normally. They just accept your channel, and if you send money to them, that's great. But if not, that's also fine. I haven't wasted any money. And that's also kind of why it can be hard to get inbound liquidity, because for you to get inbound liquidity, someone has to open a channel to you and put their own money in the channel. And if you disappeared, like they could be thinking, if this person disappears, I'm going to just waste miner fees for nothing. So that comes into the liquidity thing as well. But Fidelity Bonds and liquidity work together in that way. Yeah, but potentially in Lightning, I've seen on the mailing list, there are a few ideas for maybe having some kind of liquidity market for people can buy inbound liquidity. But I don't know. I haven't read too much into this.
So
Yeah.
So from my understanding of the spec, I mean, this seems like it's strictly better than CoinJoin, and I'm trying to understand if I'm missing something here. Like, if you're successful with this CoinSwap implementation, would there be any reason for someone to use JoinMarket, or does that usage just move over to CoinSwap?
Yeah, I hope that it would move over to CoinSwap. I don't. There's no. As far as I can see, it's better in every way. So the transactions are actually invisible. The CoinSwap transactions look like regular transactions, and JoinMarket transactions are really obvious. They have all the equal amounts. They also use much more block space. Like JoinMarket transactions, one of them is maybe about 10 times bigger than a regular transaction. And also, people don't do just one. You do CoinJoins it again and again and again. So it costs loads of miner fees. There's all kinds of advantages. The only advantage to CoinJoin that I can see is that in CoinSwap it takes a little bit longer. So you have to broadcast this transaction, wait for it to be confirmed, and once it's confirmed that this contract is safe to do. But with CoinJoin, you don't have to wait for any confirmations. You just talk to these other people you're doing a CoinJoin with, and you create the CoinJoin and broadcast it. And once it's confirmed, that's that. So in that way, CoinJoin could be a bit faster. However, I was thinking about this, like imagining, suppose you're a Bitcoin user and you want to trade Bitcoins real life in person for cash. A thing you could do with CoinSwap is you send your coins into a CoinSwap, the contract first, before you actually meet anyone. And once the thing is confirmed, you can go and meet the person and you get the cash, and then only then you make the next transaction, like the settlement transaction. And you don't have to wait anything. It'll be broadcast straight away, and once it's confirmed, then the cash is transferred. So I think in practice, it won't actually be this slowness thing won't be too much of a problem.
So let's dive into like the on-chain heuristics that are currently used to attempt to de-anonymize people. And one thing we talk a lot about, Matt and I, are just shooting the shit, or like, is there a threshold at which a number of people coin joining would provide a sufficient amount of privacy for the rest of the network just by destroying heuristics that chain surveillance companies use? It seems like, and with equal inputs and CoinJoins, it's pretty easy to pick them out on chain. And it seems like the way CoinSwap works, just because it's 2-2 or 2-3 multi-sig, it makes it much harder to follow these heuristic that chain surveillance companies use, because again, you have to assume that it isn't a CoinSwap. So is this threshold for like perceived better privacy for the rest of the network extremely low once CoinSwap's implemented?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Like, how much percentage of people do you need using something like this to make all the heuristics stop working? And I can't imagine it's very high. Like, suppose we said 5%, that means 1 in every 20. It means 1 in every 20 transactions actually breaks the heuristic, and that seems like it could be enough. But another thing we might need is that they need to be these. By the way, this also applies to pay join. Like when people are pay joining with a merchant, that would also work. But a thing that would need to be there is these transactions probably have to be quite equal throughout the economy. So you could imagine if there's some traders who only ever transact to exchanges, and if they never use any of this tech, and then there's some other, say people who do online gambling, if they always use this tech, then you could imagine it will only break the heuristic in the gambling point of view, and in the gambling sector of the economy, and never in the exchanges. So you'd probably want the entire economy, or loads of it, to to use this technology and not just one part.
Yeah, I guess that's a good segue into what would incentivize these exchanges to do so. I know Bull Bitcoin is the only exchange up in Canada that I can think of that actually CoinJoins for their users before sending funds out. Is there any economic advantage to doing this for exchanges that would incentivize them?
Only if their customers demand it, I guess. But they, I don't know if you saw, there was a recent article just yesterday by Rusty Russell who was making the point that loads of these exchanges just make their money from pumping shitcoins, like telling their customers to buy altcoins, and then they're not so interested in privacy or anything like that. So for me, that seems kind of grim. I don't think exchanges are really our, they're not our friends. It's just they have other things to think about. They're trying to make a profit or whatever. So users, if they're interested, they have to do it themselves, and that then it's useful with CoinSwap how it can be adopted unilaterally. That if you have a wallet which supports these CoinSwap transactions, you just send to an exchange, and they don't have to change anything. They don't have to even know you're doing it. They have to update anything, and it just works. In a way that it doesn't work with Lightning. With Lightning, the exchange, you make a Lightning wallet. Probably will, the next has a Lightning wallet, but it might take a while. They might not do it. So who knows?
Yeah, we saw the downfalls of these exchanges, or one exchange particularly focusing on shitcoins yesterday, when you have like a 5% price pop and Coinbase just completely shuts down because they can't handle it, because they haven't fixed their exchange because they've been focused on adding shitcoins.
The other thing is, it'll be a lot more difficult for exchanges to flag deposits that are CoinSwap, it appears, than if they were with flagging CoinJoins. It's pretty obvious on chain.
Yeah, the equal amounts really give it away, and yeah, that's definitely another advantage.
Yeah, because you wouldn't be able to know if somebody is sending it from a CoinSwap or, say, a Blockstream Green wallet, right? Because that's what Blockstream Green uses too.
The hope is that because you're saying if Blockstream Green uses multisig, but the hope is that these CoinSwap, the solution, it would use multi-party ECDSA computation, so nobody would even know that it's a multisig. It would just look like a single sig.
Yeah.
And then nothing. Then, as if you design it properly, then nothing really would give it away. That's the hope.
And so, how far along are you in actually writing out the code that'll make this implementation functional?
Right now, I'm kind of designing the exact details of how the contract should work, and all the step-by-step of, like, first Alice makes a connection to Bob and then asks Bob for one of his public keys, and then Alice makes this transaction, and then they wait. Like, there's all of those steps which you have to kind of write to make it work, and then I'll start coding. Also, I've got a plan to do it in, maybe it'll happen, maybe not, to do it in Rust, because it seems there's advantages to that language, and so I've been learning a bit of Rust right now. And one good thing about that is this would be nice if it was a library that can be easily incorporated into other wallets. So it's not like there's a whole wallet which is called the CoinSwap wallet. It's just that any other wallet, Electrum or Blockstream Green or anything like that, they could take a library which would be compiled, like which Rust can do, and then they can the user would see a checkbox, and they turn on CoinSwap or turn off CoinSwap. And once it's turned on, then the wallet calls the library, and a CoinSwap just happens. And that would be great. And then it'll be really usable. People just use the same wallets they already use.
Yeah, that would be huge, and that's one topic of conversation we actually had last week, is this sort of standardization of these wallet softwares across the industry. That's something that's been a bit of a pain in the ass up to this point, is different wallet creators using different software and being incompatible with each other. So standardizing this out of the gate would be awesome.
And fingerprinting,
or even non-privacy things like seed phrases.
Excuse me?
Even non-privacy things are not standardized across wallets, like seed phrases. Electrum has a different seed phrase to hardware wallets or something like that.
Yeah, it's what Bitcoin recovery WallaceRecovery.com. That's right,
a database of all of them. Well, that old joke of the great thing about standards is there's so many of them.
Right. And especially when you start throwing in like the hardware wallets compared to the software and paper wallets, it's.
And then the LND Lite wallet has another seed phrase which has the wallet birthday, which is a nice feature, but then no other wallet has it. So I think ultimately the only thing the network enforces is that the transaction format will be the same, and everything else could change.
Yeah.
One thing we didn't touch on here, which I kind of just blurted out, is like wallet fingerprinting, right? So when we're talking about stuff like PaySwap and CoinSwap providing basically cover for other people's transactions, if their wallet is very obvious in these unique characteristics that allow you to fingerprint that they're using a certain wallet, then those transactions don't get any cover from these type of techniques, right?
Yeah, that's right. That Bitcoin transactions have a lot of they have some data in them, like there's n sequence numbers and whether RBF is enabled or disabled, or the end lock time. Like there's a wiki page on it. There's loads of things that you can edit in a transaction, and probably it'll be something I do eventually for CoinSwap is analyze a lot of wallets like Electrum and Blockstream Green and all that things, and try and figure out exactly what they do. I mean, I didn't invent. I think I saw this on some other podcast, I think. But then you have the CoinSwap wallet or any other wallets, say 10% of the time behaves intentionally like Electrum, and then 20% of the time behaves like some other wallet, and then 30% of the time behaves like Bitcoin Core. And then that should hopefully, that should be a way to work around this fingerprinting thing, because that's also done outside of Bitcoin. I've read it's done with browser fingerprinting. You know, browsers have different things like whether JavaScript's enabled or disabled, what your operating system is, your browser version, your screen size. And then I've heard of some idea for writing a privacy browser which fakes those features, but in a different way. So it says like, now I'm going to pretend to be Linux for this version with this screen size, and then a bit later it says, now I'll pretend to be Mac with this version and this screen size. So it's the same kind of thing.
There's a lot of controversy with that with the Tor browser, right? Because the Tor browser tries to normalize all those things among all of their users. In terms of screen size is one of the big things, but because they do that, it's easier to spot when someone's using Tor browsers specifically.
Yeah, that's right. But I think isn't the thing with Tor is it's obvious if you're using Tor, because like if you go through a Tor exit node, then your IP address will be on the list of Tor exit nodes. Yeah. And if you're going to an onion address, then obviously you can only use Tor with those. So Tor doesn't have the property that you can hide that you're actually using Tor in a way that CoinSwap or PayJoin does.
Yeah. It's so fascinating how many variables go into protecting privacy on the internet
that's right.
with Bitcoin.
Every leak adds up.
Right. Like transaction broadcasting, trying to delay that, and is one aspect. The P2P network, how your node connects and relays those transactions. There's so many variables that go into play, and you've been around Bitcoin for quite a while, building software on top of it and aiming towards creating better privacy. How has privacy evolved since you've been around, and do you think it's getting better? Do you think we're in a race against time?
It's absolutely getting better. Like I remember when so we have this kind of obvious thing that to have really good privacy, you basically have to use a full node, or you have to use something which downloads every single block and then scans it on like locally to find your addresses. And if you do it another way, like with an Electrum server or something else like that, then the server will figure out what your addresses are. So this realization was, as far as I could tell, completely unknown back when I started. Just no one even realized that's a thing. Like people were thinking about CoinJoins or that kind of thing, and there was I don't remember finding anywhere, maybe there was somewhere, but I didn't see it, that people realizing that, hold on, we need full nodes if you want to have privacy. So just from that, like that's just one example of the huge progress I think we've made in this few years.
Yeah. And so are you confident in the ability for Bitcoin to provide sufficient fungibility and privacy for all users in the future? Because this is like are the Monero.
I mean, I'd hope so.
Monero
like,
stands.
That's what I'm in the business of. That's what I'm in the business of doing. But it's hard, whatever. I'm sure people invent stuff. There's a thing right now that, as far as I can tell, there's no real way to have a lightweight private wallet synchronization. So we know Wasabi Wallet, it uses those client-side block filters, where there's these filters, and then you only download the blocks that are related to you. But that's actually not very lightweight. So if you did that, where Bitcoin Core has some code which does it, and those filters for the whole blockchain, they add up to a huge amount of data, like 4 gigabytes or 5 gigabytes. And that's not, if you had a wallet where you had to download 4 gigabytes, it's not really a lightweight wallet. It's huge. And the reason Wasabi gets around that is their filters only contain Besh32 addresses. So their filters are much smaller because those addresses are quite rare on the blockchain. But those filters wouldn't work for a lightweight wallet if they had all the kinds of addresses, ETSH addresses. And
we want to see Besh32 usage go up too. So
yeah, exactly. When as usage goes up, then those filters will get bigger too. So right now, there's no real solution for lightweight wallet sync. But maybe one of the listeners can invent one, right? It's it's all progress goes incrementally, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, that's one thing I say a lot. Like, everybody wants this stuff out of the box right away, and it just doesn't happen that way, especially the way Bitcoin was designed at launch. It's going to take time, and luckily people like you are focused on this and bringing software to market that does make it better. That gets us to a point where the shoulda used Monero fans shut up at some point.
And even Monero isn't that great. Like, I sometimes rant a lot about this because there's like loads of privacy problems with Monero. No, I mean not loads, but it's obviously better than Bitcoin if it didn't have CoinJoin and stuff. But there's a thing you can do with Monero if you make repeated transactions. So Monero has those decoys, doesn't it? It takes the decoy transaction inputs and adds them to your transaction, makes a ring signature, so nobody can tell which are the real inputs. So that's only if you take one transaction in isolation. If you did 10 transactions, so if you had a Monero, say someone accepting donations in Monero, and you made 10 donations to them, 10 of their inputs. And when they go to later spend them, you have much more information. Maybe easier if I drew it, but you can do an intersection. You can figure out, because you have 10 or 20 or however many times you paid them, you have much more information you can use to take away their decoys. That's to talk about it. Maybe I can link it or something. But it's interesting that even Monero is better, but there's still attacks you can do. And the other is the scalability is way lower. So I've done a calculation that if Monero was doing the same amount of transactions that Bitcoin's doing today, then the full nodes would not be possible to run on a regular desktop. It'll just use too much CPU. So something like Monero is inherently limited. Like, you'll get better privacy, but what's the point if 1,000 times less people use it?
Yeah, and you expanded on this topic with Stefan when you were on his podcast recently.
Right,
So go check that out if you happen, freaks. But one thing in relation to CoinSwap that we haven't touched on yet, a couple things actually, is how does it affect, like how expensive are the fees, and if there's a lot of transactions, how does it affect fees? And then moving forward, let's say something like Schnorr and then Taproot gets implemented, does this change the implementation at all?
Oh, that's a good question. So the fees, so obviously it's a bit more expensive than just doing a regular transaction because they're like as cheap as they can be. They have a size, but CoinSwaps would be much cheaper for the same amount of privacy than equal output CoinJoins. So for example, in JoinMarket, there's one CoinJoin is about 10 times the size of a regular transaction, and users don't just do one CoinJoin. So the JoinMarket Tumblr script by default does about 10 CoinJoins, and each of those transactions are huge. So it's already using a huge amount of block space there, and the privacy isn't even as good as how good CoinSwap would be. So if you work out on a per privacy basis, how much miner fees you need to spend to get a certain amount of privacy, then CoinSwap comes out ahead. And another benefit of CoinSwap is because it's indistinguishable from all the other transactions. It means if you really want to cheap out one day and just make a regular Bitcoin transaction, your privacy will be improved anyway, because someone who was analyzing this would say, hold on, maybe he's doing a CoinSwap, maybe he isn't, we don't know. And that kind of externality, that benefit doesn't happen with equal output CoinJoins. So overall they'd improve efficiency for miner fees and block space. And as for Schnorr and Taproot,
sorry,
continue. Carry on.
No, you continue. I forgot about that part of the question.
So as for Schnorr and Taproot, there is a thing. So you can use Schnorr with Musig to also make two of two multi-sigs that look exactly like a single sig. And like there was an idea where we could use that instead of multi-party computation, Ecdsa. But in the beginning, there wouldn't actually be much Schnorr being used out there. So we know with SegWit, like it's been 3 years since SegWit was adopted, and maybe 60% of transactions use it. I think I saw a statistic the other day. And SegWit has a huge incentive to actually adopt it because you get cheaper miner fees by adopting it, and still only 60% of people adopted it after 3 years. And Schnorr doesn't have such an incentive. If you use single sig SegWit transactions and you adopt Schnorr, then your miner fees cost the same. There's no incentive to adopt it financially. So in that way, you can expect adoption to be even slower. And that means we may as well use multi-party. You may as well use Ecdsa for CoinSwap for now. And that has a benefit in that CoinSwap doesn't need any soft forks to make it happen. There's no way to stop it. Like you can't oppose a soft fork and then that would stop CoinSwap somehow. But it couldn't happen today.
Yeah, no, so that's nice to know. If people do adopt Schnorr in mass, it would be easy to just implement it with music.
Yeah, but realistically, I think it will take a while. And people who use multi-sig will probably adopt it first because they do have an incentive. But if you're using single sig, then there's no incentive.
Matt, do you have a question?
Oh, yeah. So with CoinJoin right now, we have JoinMarket that does where you have this maker-taker model. You have this, it's a decentralized model. And then we have these centralized coordinator models with Whirlpool and Wasabi. And with those models, you don't have to worry as much about two things: the communication channel between the parties involved in the transaction, and the issue with using Fidelity Bonds. Basically, like the Sybil attack protection using Fidelity Bonds, and the denial of service in a way, right? So do you expect? And recently, No Power made a comment. The lead dev at Wasabi made a comment in regards to. He seemed confused about the purpose of Fidelity Bonds to me. Do you envision that we'll see these centralized coordinator projects pivot to a CoinSwap type of situation, where they run a centralized coordinator that manages the CoinSwaps, and in that situation, there's no need for Fidelity Bonds, right?
Okay, so the purpose of Fidelity Bonds are useful when there's a decentralized system where anyone can be a Sybil attacker. So you could just have Chainalysis or someone runs loads of bots to do a Sybil attack. And in a centralized system, that can't happen. That Chainalysis or any adversary, they cannot become a Sybil attacker on Wasabi's or Samurai's coordinator. However, because they're centralized, then Wasabi and Samurai themselves can be the Sybil attacker. And they could do it in a much easier way than is required in JoinMarket. Because to do a Sybil attack in JoinMarket, you literally have to have 10 or 100 bots. But to do a Sybil attack in Wasabi, the Wasabi server just has to exclude everyone else except for you. Like, I don't know, maybe they have a court order that says if this transaction output does a coin join, then you have to exclude everyone else and just have your own inputs be that coin join. And then this court ordered transaction ID, I think they're doing a coin join, but actually they've been Sybil attacked. And these centralized coordinators can do that for free. Like, there's nothing technically stopping them.
Right. I mean,
there's not to say they're not useful, but that's like, that's the trust model. There's trade-offs, like there's benefits.
It even goes further.
So then
than
for Fidelity Bonds, it won't help them because it can't help them. It's only useful in a decentralized setting. As for whether they'd adopt, sorry, carry on.
I'm sorry. I'm just very excited. This is a great chat. It even goes further than that because the Sybil resistance is the fee that's paid to the centralized coordinator. So who's ever running the centralized coordinator doesn't have to pay that fee. So they don't even have to necessarily exclude transactions. They could just Sybil like crazy without ever really. They just pay minor fee.
Yeah, that's right. So they, like, you could say if there's 10 people who want to do a coin join, and in like the normal way in Wasabi or Samurai, those 10 people would make one coin join. But actually, if the coordinator Sybil attacks all them, then there'd actually be 10 CoinJoins with one like real person per CoinJoin, and everyone else being a Sybil attacker. And they'd earn all the same fees and they'd make the same money. It's just the miner fees would be a bit higher. And as for if they do CoinSwap, I haven't really thought. I've been mostly interested in doing this in a decentralized setting because, like, I have the view that to have real privacy, you need censorship resistance, because otherwise the censor could just censor you until you reveal your privacy relevant information. So I haven't thought too much about doing CoinSwap in a centralized way. I suspect it's not. I'm not that interested really, but maybe in future someone could figure out a way to do it. Like, because there is a benefit to the Wasabi and Samurai way of doing things, is they have an income. They can like they can hire developers and make a really nice wallet that's really, works really well and has all the features. So there's nothing necessary. There's some good things about centralization. I don't want to completely disregard it, but it is less good at being private.
And the communication channel, right? Like that is, so with CoinSwap, is it going to use Is it going to use IRC based communication again, like with JoinMarket?
No, I've been. That's part of the design. I've been thinking probably the best way to do it is something similar to Bisq, where each maker makes their own Tor hidden service, their own onion, and then when a market taker comes along, they connect to each of these onions and download their fees, their CoinSwap fees and other information like the max CoinSwap size. And then Tor is by default encrypted and it's hidden where the actual service is. I think that's the best way, because like JoinMarket today uses IRC and it's not that good. Like, let's be honest, I made it right at the beginning and it's not very, it works, but it's a bit centralized.
That's fascinating. And before we get any further, you are accepting donations for this build out of your implementation, correct?
Yeah, that's right. So it will be decentralized, and there's no way I or anyone else can collect fees to fund development, and it just development happens on by donations. So I'll say the website I'm using now, which is bitcoinprivacy.me/CoinSwap-donations, and there people can find Bitcoin addresses that go to me if they want to support this work financially. And they can also review it technically if they're interested, if they have the skills. But I'm trying to make it like an open source, like something like Linux or Bitcoin Core itself, where it can be a community thing and it could exist forever. Like if I ever lose interest, then hopefully it'll still be there and people can still use it to improve their privacy. But for now, I'm committed to making it a reality.
Matt and I were admiring your donation site. It's the best donation site I've seen to date. You hit refresh, you get a new address right away. Very
PGB
clean,
signed.
straightforward. PGB signed.
Yeah, that's the stop. The way it actually works, if anyone wants to make their own, it's I made many Bitcoin addresses from my XPub and then signed them with my PGP key on my own hard drive, and then uploaded them all to the server. And then there's just a simple PHP script which goes to a new one every time refresh is hit. And then on my full node here in my home, it just watches all those addresses for when a donation arrives. I was thinking of using BTC Pay Server, but honestly, I thought it would be more fun to do it myself. Most people would be better off using BTC Pay Server, but I did it this way.
I'm sorry, I probably contributed to your need to jump forward a bunch of addresses because I was just hitting refresh.
That's okay. There is a huge amount of them. They don't take much disk space. Like each address is it's like 500 bytes, including the signature. So if most of these hosting things give you like gigabytes, you can fill the whole thing up with addresses. Yeah, they're basically infinite. Like you press F5 all you want.
There is. You mentioned BTC Pay, and I was talking to someone about this the other day that no one really discusses it. And I also didn't really, I didn't think about it until this person brought it up, because I was trying to get them to add BTC Pay to their site, and they're a very security conscious person. There is a bit of a man in the middle risk there in terms of, is the address shown actually controlled by the person you intend to donate to or pay? That you do get around by doing the PGP signed, right? Like I never really thought about it that way.
Yeah, that's true. Although I think a lot of people using BTC Pay per server, they'll have HTTPS. And as long as you trust that whole system, which is more centralized than PGP, but that should, in theory, stop a man-in-the-middle attack. I mean, that's how it works for when you buy things regularly, like on Amazon. They all rely on HTTPS for their security. So, in theory, it's okay, I guess.
And it's, while we're on the topic of BTC Pay, I think it's a great example of an open source project that's garnered a lot of attention and support from developers, and even grant support from companies and individuals. So hopefully something similar will happen to your implementation.
Yeah, I hope so.
So are you looking for engineering help before you launch it, or will you sort of launch it and then start accepting PRs and
yeah, I think I'd be I'm looking for help in review, that if people look at the design and if they see any attacks or anything like that, they tell me. And then as soon as I start writing code, I have that idea of release early and release often. So I'll make the minimum viable product that only works on testnet and put that on GitHub, and from there iterate. And so hopefully people, if they're interested, they can read the code as early as possible. See, I mean, it was the same with JoinMarket. Like, you can go back to years ago and find the very first testnet JoinMarket that worked.
Going through your GitHub here, I noticed you have a fork of the user-activated soft fork. Were you maintaining a good?
No, I think I added a company that said they would use a UASF full node on their to accept Bitcoins. I don't remember who. I think it was someone who like Bitrefill back then. They were quite new, and they were one of the people they'd run UASF, and then I think there was a Volturo that they trade gold for Bitcoin. I've forgotten exactly. It was a few years ago, but it was something like that. I could probably look at the GitHub and find out who I did. But no, I didn't run the site. I just wrote a PR. Yeah, that was an interesting time in Bitcoin.
All right. What do you think we'll have as hard a time getting a soft fork implemented in the future? Is that
who knows?
To be?
Like it's really hard to say. Like from one point of view, you could say that the victory with SegWit means that any other fights, there'll be no point in them happening because the other side know they're going to lose. But from the other side, you could say, well, they still caused loads of drama and delayed SegWit a bit, so they might try again anyway. But I think there's a lot back then. A good thing about now is many more enthusiasts are aware of how important full nodes are. And back in 2016 or so, it was much less well known. As it took like education, and it took telling the community, and a lot more people know about that. And there's better technology as well, easier ways to connect your wallet to your full node. So I think people will, like, because full nodes are so I don't know. I mean, it's hard to measure, of course, but I feel like they're more common and they're more aware. There's more awareness how important they are. Then attacks which depend on there not being full nodes will be less successful, hopefully.
Yeah, it's been great to see the proliferation of out-of-the-box node hardware and better software, things like Raspberry Blitz, the Nodl. And actually, I'm interested to get your thoughts on the Bitcoin wallet tracker that was released last week. You've worked a lot on the Electrum personal server, and that's been somewhat of a pain in the ass for people who aren't as technically competent as others. This Bitcoin wallet tracker that was released last week, that's an Electrum plugin that lets you connect to your full node. What are your thoughts on that? Like, what are the trade-offs there, and is it materially better?
No, it sounds great to me. Like, I haven't spent much time. I haven't downloaded it or anything like that. But Sheshek and I talked a bit over IRC and Twitter, and it seems really great. Like and the idea of having it as a plugin is quite good. For me personally, I always, at least for the way I run it myself, is I have a little Raspberry Pi which has the Electrum personal server on it, and then my Electrum connects to that. And I don't know how that would work if you. So does Bitcoin Wallet Tracker, I don't know if any of you have run it, but does that mean you need the full node on the same machine? Like, does it need to be on your laptop where your wallet is if it runs with a plugin?
Well, you can do both.
But either way, you can do both.
Yeah, it could be a drop-in replacement for Electrum personal server where you run it on a dedicated device, or you can just run Core on your machine and BWT and Electrum, and you're good.
Okay, that's great then.
Yeah, it seems like the UX around running a full node and connecting to it and actually using it is getting considerably better as well.
Yeah.
Chris,
It would be good.
yeah.
I should tell Sheshik, but it's good to know anyway that it would be good if Tor broadcasting was added. You know, this feature where when you click broadcast an Electrum, then the server can broadcast your transaction over Tor instead of using ClearNet, and that could be good for privacy, so your IP address isn't leaked with broadcasting. Electrum personal server does this, and it shouldn't be too hard to add to BWT.
Yeah, that's what's been encouraging about the node hardware. It's been coming out too. It's just naturally been running through Tor, so hopefully stuff like that just makes that just common practice out of the gate.
Yeah, and that would be great.
What else are you excited about in the world of Bitcoin or outside of Bitcoin? You've been working on this for quite some time. You mentioned you're into gaming. What else piques your interest?
I haven't actually played games for a few years, to be honest. I know it's old news, but Lightning is just generally exciting. Like, you can send the transaction basically instantly, and for low fees, and I think that's really good. I guess. I don't know what else. I suppose I've been learning Rust, and that's kind of exciting. New language.
Yeah, Rust. A lot of the devs I talk to, just the way they explain it is just like Rust is more powerful. Like, that's what BWT was made with, right? That's like
exactly. Yeah. And it's aimed to be safe. It's aimed to have inherently safety features, so that it's impossible. Like, the compiler won't allow you to do things like have a memory leak or free null pointers or things that you have to take care of in C++, and you don't in Rust. At least that's the idea. I haven't learned it properly yet, but it's a good thing to aim for.
Yeah, it seems, just from what I can tell, it seems like a really strong language that you want to be building Bitcoin software with. Really try to have implementations written in it.
Yeah.
What
are you guys interested in?
Well, I like to surf. I write and talk, and then outside of this, I surf. We're very interested in Lightning as well. We fawn over. I use Lightning every day. I've been actually combining Lightning and gaming, the Bitcoin bounty hunter game that allows you to put ads in their game and pay for them via Lightning. That's been like one of the coolest things cool. I've seen in the space recently. So I've been making sure our ads are sufficiently funded on that game. That, and then I'd like to focus on the adoption side too, and education side. I think the education around Bitcoin has gotten a lot better over the last 3 years, particularly. And I'm very interested to see if Bitcoin begins getting more attention in the mainstream, how well new users will sort of understand the technology and the software available to them once they discover Bitcoin and start using it.
Important. For me, I've kind of noticed I might not be very good at the explaining to noobs, because it seems like I spend a lot of time with the technical details, and then it's sometimes hard to dial that down when you talk to people who are new to this stuff. Like, I kind of noticed that CoinSwap. I'm like, oh, you do this thing and it has a hash time like contract, and then I guess people will be like, oh, what is that?
What's a hash?
Yeah, what's a hash? Yeah.
No, I've experienced this too recently. I've been going on more. One thing I'm very interested in, would be remiss of me not to mention, is I work for a company that we're mining as well, and we're using wasted energy to mine Bitcoin, particularly on oil and gas fields here in the United States. And because of this, we've been getting some attention in the oil and gas industry here. So I've gone on a couple of oil gas podcasts recently, and have had this experience where they're completely new to Bitcoin, and having to explain it to them when I've been writing to an audience of Bitcoiners and running this podcast with other Bitcoiners. It really drives home, oh my gosh, you do need to dumb down some of these concepts and think about the beginner's road to understanding Bitcoin.
It's a good thing for all of us to practice sometimes.
Yeah, no, it's not. Like, yeah, I had that same experience. They were like explaining like, how does mining work, and I was like, how much do you know about Hashcash SHA-256 proof of work? Like trying to explain difficulty adjustments, and I got like a little off the rails.
But that's good, like the wasted energy, because that energy is basically free, isn't it? Like you, zero cost. So then you just need the ASICs and you get free money. Yeah,
it's so the ASICs and then the generators too actually consume the energy and convert it to.
Yeah, because doesn't it come off as natural gas that you have to burn or something?
Exactly. Yeah. So those are what factor into your kilowatt per hour cost, but even so, you're able to get it down pretty low with this wasted energy.
Yeah.
What about you, Matt? What are you excited about right now outside of CoinSwaps?
Well, I mean, I love Bitcoin. Bitcoin is fascinating. People are fascinating. Love talking to people. I don't know. Privacy is fucking massive. I think we've been very focused here on education. We have a long way to go. But I do think it's really cool how many people are focused on education that aren't scammers, which is what in the past, you see people come in and they go to YouTube and they buy the courses on blockchain and stuff like that. And you just really hate to see it. But now, you have like Stefan Livera, you have Catan that works with him at Ministry of Nodes, you have 6102 Bitcoin. There's like this whole sub-industry that's developing of Bitcoin education that really seems to be focusing on the right principles. In terms of privacy, I think we're starting to, I'm fascinated by privacy, not just on a Bitcoin level. And I just think we're starting to hit a critical mass here where people are realizing why it's important, because their privacy is getting trampled on left and right.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, another thing that's very interesting right now is the state of the world, geopolitics, China taking Hong Kong. Obviously, we got some interesting things happen here in the United States. Like, is Bitcoin ready for not mass adoption, but considerably more adoption in the face of people maybe needing to turn to it? That's another thing that I'm very curious to see. Like, if Bitcoin does get a lot of attention soon, like, is the protocol ready to onboard a bunch more people?
Yeah, that's right. I don't know how well known this is, but back in 2017-ish, I was reading, there's the Reddit subreddit for the Syrian civil war. Back then it was a big thing. There was Aleppo and Damascus and all that stuff. And I came across a couple of people who were actually trading Bitcoin there because it was because there was huge inflation in Syria. And they were just, dollar cost averaging into Bitcoin essentially. And they had, one of them mentioned this thing on Reddit that a great thing of Bitcoin is you can, if you end up being a refugee because there's a war and if you have to like go to Turkey or something, then you can take your Bitcoins with you, just memorize them in your head. And like that's sort of what we're here for, aren't we? We're helping people. One of the use cases, we're helping people store their wealth if they need to protect it from being seized. Yeah, that was a real life example of it. And there it was, I was kind of surprised because I was thinking maybe they're going to, do they need this explaining? But they seem to just get it. They're like, you have a wallet and then you send it to this person and they give you cash and it just works.
Once you need it, it's pretty obvious, I feel like.
Yeah, the hard part seems to be understanding what money is. Like, you have this thing called Bitcoin and it's like money. And once you understand that, then in theory, it's just clicking buttons, right? You click send, you click receive, write down a seed phrase, hopefully.
It's crazy to see how much utility Bitcoin provides, depending on your different use case. You just described a Syrian escaping to Turkey, keeping a seed phrase in their head to escape terrorist and a dictatorship. But then, like, I've talked with Matt Alborg, who's doing a lot of research on how people are using it in Venezuela and Argentina, trying to escape hyperinflation and using Bitcoin as a rail to send money so that they can get dollars. It's also that's the beauty of Bitcoin, right? It's just this apolitical messaging system. And if you can download the software and interact with it, you can participate. And it doesn't know what you're using it for, or how you're using it, or why you're using it. It just works.
That would be one place where privacy is important, because if suppose you're the Syrian guy and you want to cross the border in Turkey, and they say, "Aha, you've got we see your mobile phone data. Look, you've been using a Bitcoin wallet. Hand it over, son." You don't want to be in that situation. And that is actually one thing I'm concerned about with how there's no solution for lightweight wallet sync. Like these wallets on people's smartphones, they all connect to some server and tell them their addresses. It's probably okay now. I'm sure the Turkish border guards can't do this, but in theory they could. In theory they could have something that scans or figures out the internet service provider and figures out what your Bitcoin addresses are. That will probably happen one day. Like if we're in early days, and eventually the authorities will, or anyone who wants to steal your Bitcoins will learn about this. So that should be something we should fix. We need a way on smartphones, people can synchronize their wallets anonymously, and I don't think that exists now.
Would something like AB Core help that, or are you still?
Yeah, possibly. You could just have full nodes on a smartphone. That could be one way. Maybe smartphones get powerful enough and bandwidth gets cheap enough, and it could happen. But I think there's a long way. Like you need another few doublings of Moore's law, at least for bandwidth, to make that possible.
It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. That's another thing that I like to observe is how people extrapolate the current state of Bitcoin and just technology in general and how computers work, extrapolate that to the future and sort of discount potential innovations and efficiencies that could happen. A lot of linear thinking.
Yeah, but the thing with Bitcoin is the blockchain is linear. Like every block, you generally get new addresses that are mined into the blockchain, and any wallet would have to synchronize them somehow. Like somehow figure out, these are my addresses that come from my seed phrase, and I want to figure out if they have transactions on them, and how do I do that? I don't know. We'll see. I should think about it some more. I'm just kind of thinking out loud here.
I love that.
Do you have any thoughts on Lightning as a privacy tech?
Oh yeah, it's great. Like this idea of not having your transaction on chain is basically a revolution. Like all the things we talked about earlier, the transaction graph and the common input ownership heuristic and things like address reuse and change address detection, they just don't exist in Lightning. There are no change addresses. There are no multiple inputs into a transaction. It's all off chain. Okay, there's other attacks, but just the fact that the transactions aren't visible to everyone, I think, is a huge help. So yeah, absolutely, it's a great privacy tech somehow. Although it still has the thing that channels are on the blockchain. You could analyze if someone figured out your channel, because your Lightning wallet also has to message a third-party server to figure out what your channel UTXOs are. Then someone could analyze based on that. Yeah, we'll see how that goes. I don't know. But the building blocks are there to solve it somehow.
Yeah, it shows promise is like kind of my perspective, right? Yeah. Especially on like the receiving side, the privacy, like it leaves a lot to be desired on the privacy front if you're receiving Lightning transactions.
Yeah, it depends. A lot of the stuff is with your threat model. Like you can. I'm sometimes asked, like, if I do this, will I be private? Will I have enough privacy? And then the thing I answer is, okay, who are you actually hiding from? Like, if you're hiding from some, Turkish border guard or someone who doesn't really, then you don't, or just some looter, then you won't, probably don't have to try too hard. But if you're hiding from, the United States government or something, you have to try a lot harder. And the US government, they have the power to, presumably, we believe, to look at every internet packet out there, which, Turkish border guard doesn't.
I think they just made a law here.
What's that? What does the law say?
They're trying to make it a law where they can get access to all of your internet data. They have indiscriminate rights to check your messages on social media and all that stuff.
Yeah, and the whole social media thing is a big privacy leak. Really, like, it's amazing people give away all that information just for nothing.
Yeah, that's another thing that sort of excites me about Lightning, this idea of LN URL auth. If we were able to, instead of giving username and passwords to companies that they then store on their own databases, which are highly susceptible to getting hacked, you have an authorization flow from a node that you control and public keys within that node. Your public key being signed by your private key is basically authentication.
Yeah, so you use your private key as a login.
Yeah. That excites me as well. Sort of re-architecting that interaction between user and service provider on the internet would be huge.
Yeah, although I'm not sure. And yeah, like, it's good for privacy that you don't have usernames and passwords, but there's still people, like, you go on Facebook and people upload pictures of themselves, which can be sent to facial recognition algorithms and things like that. And that won't change if people don't use passwords anymore, if they use a private key instead.
No, we say it many times on this podcast. We're all face fucked.
Yeah,
if you're not doing it on social media, there's so many cameras in the cities now that it's not even.
Well, then maybe with the
tracking devices in our pockets.
That's right. Although maybe one thing with the pandemic is if more people wear face masks. You must have heard of that. Wearing a face mask can help break facial recognition.
Well, in America, we have this weird phenomenon. Well, at least before the rioting happened, there was this weird phenomenon where people were saying once face masks became basically mandatory at the state level, it was an act of defiance not to wear a face mask, which I thought was a really interesting psychological experiment. And I said to Marty, I was like, I wonder, like, if they mandated end-to-end encryption, if people would just send plain text messages as like an act of defiance.
Right.
Right. Yeah. It's funny how psychology is sometimes.
Right. I mean, and it's funny how that's an example of, like, mass hysteria coming into play. And it's been a topic too, obviously, with the riots.
Yeah.
People are being manipulated by the media and the governments to act in certain ways, and they seem to be pretty easily manipulated these days.
Yeah.
What most people don't realize is in New York, since the 1800s, it's been illegal to be with more than two people with face masks on in public.
Really?
Yeah, so this is like the first real protest we've had in New York City, at least, where you're legally allowed and actually compelled to wear face masks to the protest. It's an interesting thing to think about.
Why was that?
I suppose it was never enforced, this law.
It was enforced selectively, just like all the good laws
Yeah,
are.
yeah. Just when you need an excuse.
Yeah, I've worn a face mask in New York City for 10 years. Never got stopped once. But, I'm a white person and I wasn't doing, specific things that they decided to enforce it on.
Yeah. You weren't getting stopped and frisked.
Not once.
No. Yeah, so many things to think about. But luckily Bitcoin exists. I'd be a lot more pessimistic if Bitcoin didn't exist. And luckily we have people like you, Chris, working to make this better, and not only for yourself, but for everybody. And the work you're doing is extremely important. And I'm very happy you're doing it and very appreciative of all the effort that you put into this.
Yeah, thanks for saying so.
That's, I hope you realize that people appreciate your work, and it does not go unnoticed.
Very grateful.
Yeah, thank you.
I want to be respectful of your time. We blocked off an hour and a half here. We're coming to the end of that if you factor in our pre-conversation and what we've recorded already. Is there any parting notes, final thoughts you want to leave the freaks before we wrap up here?
Well, no, just for the CoinSwap thing, that if you can review it technically, then do that. That would be appreciated. And if you want to support me with a donation, that would be very helpful as well. Just those things, really. And, think about how you think about your privacy, because it helps everyone.
Should people go to your GitHub to help review, or they have to reach out personally?
No, it's on the actual design, the mailing list email and the
Okay.
gist. So that's the
Okay, on
design
the gist.
that has all the building blocks.
Okay. All right, so go check that out. We will link to the gist and your donation page in the show notes. Again, Chris, thank you for what you do. Really appreciate you taking some time to come explain this
having me.
stuff to. Anytime. We should do this again. Hopefully, when you get closer to actually releasing a workable implementation, we can link up again and talk about how it actually works and get people using it.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Anything from you, Matt?
Yes, please. We'd love to have you back.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks
right.
for having me again. Have a good day.
You as well. That's all we got this week, freaks. Peace and love.